Welcome to our channel. Today we'll show you a 2005 epic historical fiction drama film titled Kingdom of Heaven. Set during the Crusades, the Kingdom of Heaven is a story of a young blacksmith who travels to Jerusalem to prove his knighthood and protect innocent souls. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The film begins with a title card saying that it's almost 100 years since Christian armies from Europe seized Jerusalem. Europe suffers in the grip of repression and poverty. Peasant and lord alike flee to the Holy Land in search of fortune or salvation. One knight returns home in search of his son. The next scene shifts to a remote village in France in 1184. A grave is being prepared by two men and a priest for the corpse of a woman who recently commits suicide. This woman is the wife of Balian, a blacksmith and half-brother of the priest. The cruel priest examines the woman's body and steals the cross necklace from her neck. That's when men of Crusaders walk past them. Meanwhile, the corpse is beheaded and given an improper burial because suicide is a grave offense to the Catholic faith. Later, the Lord Bishop asks the priest to release Balian. He says that without your brother, I cannot finish my church. Let him out. One day, Baron Godfrey of Ibelin arrives to meet Balian. He tells Balian that he's his father, and he asks Balian to return with him to Jerusalem. Balian refuses and the Crusaders leave. Later that day, the priest persistently convinces Balian to leave their village in an attempt to claim Balian's property. He also reveals that he had arranged for the Crusaders to come and take Balian away with them and ordered Balian's wife beheaded before burial. Balian finally fed up with his half-brother and became outraged. Balian then brutally kills the priest by burning him and takes his wife's necklace from him. Balian then joins his father in the hope of gaining forgiveness and redemption for him and his wife. Later in the woods, Godfrey instructs him in swordsmanship. During the training, soldiers led by Godfrey's nephew arrive to arrest Balian. Godfrey refuses to hand him over, and during the subsequent fight, most of Godfrey's men are killed and Godfrey himself is mortally wounded. However, they continued their journey toward Jerusalem. In Messina, port of the Holy Land, Godfrey orders Balian to serve the king of Jerusalem. Balian replies, "What could a king ask of a man like me?" Godfrey says, "A better world that has ever been seen. A kingdom of conscience, a kingdom of heaven. There's peace between Christian and Muslim. We live together, or between Saladin and the king, we try." Later that night, Godfrey dies after taking an oath from Balian. On Balian's journey to Jerusalem, his ship is run aground by a storm, leaving Balian and a horse as the survivors of the wreck. Later in the desert, Balian is confronted by a Muslim cavalier and his servant. A fight over possession of the horse follows, and Balian slays the horseman but spares the servant, asking him to guide him to Jerusalem. Upon their arrival in Jerusalem, Balian gives the horse to the servant and releases him. The man then tells him his slain master was an important knight amongst the Saracens. Long story short, after being accepted as new lord of Ibelin by Godfrey's retainers, Balian soon becomes acquainted with the main players in Jerusalem's political arena. The leper King Baldwin IV, Tiberius, Marshal of Jerusalem, Princess Sibylla, King Baldwin IV's sister, and Guy de Lusignan, Sibylla's arrogant, prejudiced, and scheming husband. The leper king invites Balian for chess. The leper king then shows Balian the fortification of the city of Jerusalem. He asks for Balian's suggestions to improve it. Balian skillfully gives ways to strengthen the walls, making the leper king fond of him. The leper king then asks him to go to his father's house at Ibelin and protect the pilgrim road. Balian settles in his new land of Ibelin. Using his skills as a blacksmith, he earns the respect of his knights and subjects by building an irrigation system. Sibylla travels to meet him. With each passing day, Sibylla grows fonder of Balian because of his nobility. And inevitably, they spend an intimate night together, becoming secret lovers. The next scene shifts to Guy and his co-conspirator, Reginald of Chatillon, massacring a Muslim trade caravan with the aid of the Templars. Saladin, leader of the Muslim forces, attacks Kerak, Reginald's castle, to bring him to account for his crime. Balian decides to protect the villagers as they attempt to enter the castle from Saladin's cavalry. Though outnumbered, Balian and his knights charge Saladin's cavalry, allowing the villagers time to flee to the castle. Balian's knights are soon defeated, resulting in their capture. In the enemy camp, Balian encounters the servant he freed, Imad ad-Din, learning he's actually Saladin's chancellor, who then releases Balian to enter Kerak. Meanwhile, Saladin arrives with his army to besiege Kerak, and King Baldwin IV approaches with this. The two rulers successfully negotiate a Muslim retreat, and Baldwin swears that he will punish Reginald for his crimes. The exertion of these events caused Baldwin to collapse, weak and beyond recovery. Later, Baldwin asks Balian to marry Sibylla, knowing that the pair have affection for each other. But Balian refuses. Sibylla, in disbelief of Balian's rejection, ends their relationship, telling him that he will regret his decision, and there will come a day when he will wish he had done a little evil to do the greater good. Soon after, Aldwin dies and the whole city of Jerusalem mourns. Sibylla approaches the corpse of the king and takes off his mask, revealing his deformed face, which shocks her. The following day, Sibylla's 6-year-old son Baldwin V becomes king of Jerusalem. After a few days, it quickly becomes apparent that he's also infected with leprosy. Grief-stricken and unwilling to condemn her son to a life behind a mask, Sibylla gives him poison. Sibylla succeeds her son and names Guy king of Jerusalem. Guy releases Reynold, asking him to give him a war, which Reynold does by murdering Saladin's sister. When Saladin sends an emissary to demand the return of his sister's body, the heads of those responsible and the surrender of Jerusalem. Guy answers by decapitating the emissary and sending his head back to Damascus. As the cavalry of Jerusalem is assembling for battle, Balian suddenly appears before the war council to stop them from leaving the city. Guy refuses to listen to Balian and pushes through for war, leaving Jerusalem unguarded except for Balian, Tiberius, his knights, and the townspeople. Saladin's army attacks the Crusader army near the city of Hattin. Guy and Reynold are captured. Saladin executes Reynold and then marches on to Jerusalem, sparing Guy out of tradition but stating that he's not worthy of this. Back at Jerusalem, Balian prepares the defenses, challenging the Tiberius advice to flee. Knowing that they cannot defeat the Saracens, they hope to hold their enemies off long enough for the Saracens to offer terms. Meanwhile, remaining true to himself and showing the example of his late father, Godfrey, Balian inspires the people within the city. Finally, the war begins with Saladin initiating the attack by throwing fireballs to the walls of the city, causing severe damage. But Balian intentionally doesn't fight back to reserve their counterattack for the next day. As 3 days pass, the assaults against Saladin's cavalry become more and more evident on the side of Balian's favor. After 3 days and having proven their resolve, Saladin offers terms. Balian surrenders Jerusalem when Saladin offers all the inhabitants safe passage to Christian lands. Balian points out that when the Crusaders conquered Jerusalem 100 years previously, they massacred the Muslim inhabitants, but Saladin assures him that he's not those men. After considering his terms and reflecting on everything that had happened, he surrendered Jerusalem to Saladin. As the two begin to return back to their respective sides, Balian stops and asks Saladin, "What is Jerusalem worth?" He stops, replies nothing, and returns to the Muslims. His comment meant that Jerusalem, as a city, is worth nothing. As Saladin continues walking, he stops again, looks at Balian, and delivers his second answer: everything. As he turns to the city, Balian tells the inhabitants Saladin's terms and that all will be safely escorted to the sea. Furthermore, he says, if this is the kingdom of heaven, let God do with it what he will. The people inside the city cheered and celebrated. Afterward, Balian encounters Sibylla and tells her that her brother's kingdom was in his head and his heart. Sibylla asks him what she'll do now since she's still the queen of several cities outside of Jerusalem. Balian suggests renouncing her claim as queen, and if she does, he will come for her and they'll go away together. The following day, the disgraced and humiliated Guy, after having been released by Saladin, confronts Balian one last time and challenges him to a fight. Balian defeats him. He ultimately spares him and said, "When you rise again, if you rise, rise a knight." Before leaving the city, Imad returns to horse the Balian, saying it was not a good horse anyway, and asks him if God didn't love Balian, how could he have accomplished so much? Saladin's forces replaced the cross at the top of the church with a crescent. In the marching column of Christian citizens, Balian finds Sibylla, who has renounced her claim as Queen of Jerusalem and other cities. They hold each other's hands as they smile at each other and walk toward the sea. Balian returns back to his village in France. Later, a column of English knights rides through the village looking for Balian, whose legendary reputation has spread throughout Europe as a defender of Jerusalem. Balian replies that he's the blacksmith, and the man identifies himself as King Richard I of England, and they're commencing a new crusade to retake Jerusalem from Saladin. Balian and Sibylla leave the village for good and ride towards a new life together. An epilogue states the following: the king, Richard the Lionheart, went on to the Holy Land and crusaded for 3 years. He struggled to regain Jerusalem, ended in an uneasy truce with Saladin. Nearly 1,000 years later, peace in the kingdom of heaven remains elusive. And that's all about this video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with such interesting movie recap videos.